The grand chamber of the Valdari High Synod was not designed for silence. It was architecturally engineered to amplify the resonance of authority, a sprawling cavern of acoustic stone and bioluminescent crystal, where the slightest whisper of a ruling exarch could cascade down the tiered seating like a landslide. Yet now, a silence so profound, so heavy with the suffocating weight of realization, pressed against the high-vaulted ceiling that the air itself felt thin, barely breathable. High Exarch Calith stood at the apex of the central dais, his six-fingered hands gripping the railing until the chitin of his knuckles turned the pale white of stress. Below him, the assembled representatives of the Galactic Concordat, a coalition of a dozen starfaring species that had ruled the spiral arm for 10,000 cycles, shifted uneasily in their pods. They were ancient races, beings of refined energy, masters of gravity, weavers of light. They were the architects of the nebulas and the gardeners of star clusters, and they were afraid. They were afraid not of the encroaching darkness that gnawed at the fringes of their territory, the scourge known as the Void Hunters, which had consumed 3 border systems in a single rotation, but of something far more domestic, something they had dismissed with a laugh only 5 cycles ago. They were afraid of their own joke. Calith remembered the day the decision was made, the memory sharp and bitter like acidic nectar on his tongue. The humans had petitioned for entry into the Concordat, a young, brash, short-lived species from a high-gravity death world of volatile weather and unstable tectonics. They were scavengers, barely out of their chemical rocket infancy, possessing a crude, faster-than-light drive that tore holes in reality rather than sliding elegantly through subspace. They had come begging for technology, for protection, for a seat at the table of elders. The Concordat, in its infinite arrogance and bureaucratic cruelty, had decided to humiliate them. They had granted the humans conditional auxiliary status, a title that meant nothing, and as a token of this new alliance they had gifted humanity a ship. But it was not a ship in any functional sense. It was the Valkarthad, the Broken Spine, a derelict super-dreadnought from a war forgotten by history, a hulk of twisted durasteel and leaking reactor cores that had been drifting in the scrapyards of the Antares Belt for a millennia. It was a radioactive coffin, a labyrinth of fused bulkheads and shattered logic engines. The gift was a mockery. The message was clear: here is our trash, choke on it. The council had laughed as the human tugs dragged the mountain of scrap away, vanishing into the dark. They expected the humans to bankrupt themselves trying to cut it apart for raw resources, or perhaps poison their own shipyard workers with its leaking waste. Now the holographic display in the center of the grand chamber flickered to life, projecting a real-time feed from the edge of the contested zone, the Kethlan sector. The Void Hunter Armada was there, a swarm of biological horror, living ships of bone and flesh that consumed metal and crew alike. The Concordat's 7th Fleet, a collection of graceful, golden-hulled warships with shields of harmonic resonance, was burning. The feed showed the devastation in high definition. Elegant spires of Valdari cruisers were snapped like dry twigs. The shimmering shields of the Olton frigates flickered and died under the barrage of organic plasma. The Concordat was losing. They were dying with dignity, certainly their formations perfect, their retreat calculated, but they were dying nonetheless. The Void Hunters were too fast, too savage, their tactics ignoring the established rules of engagement that the Concordat held sacred. Calith watched a flagship, the pride of the fleet, dissolve as a hunter leviathan latched onto its hull and poured digestive enzymes through the armor. The scream of the dying ship over the comms was a digital shriek that made the counselors recoil. "The defensive line has collapsed," Counselor Vrox said, his voice a low rumble from his gravel-filled throat. Vrox was a terrestrial heavy worlder, a creature of rock and magma, usually stoic, but even he looked crumbled. "The 7th Fleet is effectively combat ineffective. The path to the core worlds is open. We have nothing left to throw at them. The reserves are weeks away. We need to sue for peace." "There is no peace with the hunger," Calith replied, his voice sounding hollow. "They do not negotiate, they eat. We sent the distress call to all auxiliary forces, did we not? Where are the mercenaries? Where are the border patrols?" "They are fleeing," Vrox grunted. "Or they are dead. Wait. Sensors are picking up a signature, a massive displacement event. Someone is jumping in, but the coordinates are wrong. They are jumping directly into the gravity well of the combat zone. Suicide." The Council CH. Amber held its collective breath. Jumping into a gravity well was impossible for standard drives. The tidal forces would shear a ship into atoms. Only a madman or a malfunctioning computer would attempt it. The holographic display shifted, zooming out to capture the arrival. Space did not shimmer or fold as it did when Concordat ships arrived. It tore. It looked as though the fabric of the universe was being punched from the other side by a bruised fist. Violet lightning arced across the sensor feed, blinding in its intensity, and gravity waves rippled out with such violence that the surviving Concordat ships were tossed aside like leaves in a gale. And then, it emerged. Calith's primary heart seized. He recognized the silhouette, though it was changed. It was the Valkarthad, but it was no longer the broken spine. It was a monstrosity. The humans had not scrapped it, they had not cleaned it, they had built on top of it. The elegance of the original ancient design was gone, buried under layers of bolted-on armor plates that looked like scars. The hull was a patchwork quilt of different metals, welded together with brutal efficiency. Where there had once been graceful curves, there were now jagged spikes of sensor arrays and weapon batteries that looked too large for the frame. The ship was not white or gold. It was the color of dried blood and industrial grease, painted in matte black and warning yellow. It was leaking radiation, a deliberate venting that created a halo of toxic green light around the vessel. It was ugly. It was terrifying. It was the visual definition of violence. By the ancestors, a soft-voiced counselor from the aquatic castes whispered, "Is that the scrap hull?" "It is," Calith confirmed, his eyes unable to look away. "The humans, they fixed it." "Fixed it?" Vrock scoffed, though his tremor betrayed him. "They butchered it. Look at the energy readings. That core is unstable. It's running at 300% of its rated maximum. It's a bomb waiting to go off. They haven't restored the ancient tech. They've forced it to run on combustion, fission. It's primitive madness." The sensor officer, a multi-limbed drone servitor linked directly to the station's mainframe, spoke in a flat, terrified monotone. "Transmission incoming. Wideband, unencrypted. Audio only." "Put it through," Calith ordered. The speakers crackled with the sound of static, heavy breathing, and the background roar of machinery that sounded like a rock crusher. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was not the melodious, synthesized voice of a diplomat. It was a human voice, rough, tired, and laced with a cold, iron-hard calm. "Concordat Command, this is the Terran heavy cruiser Hephaestus," the voice said. "We received your distress signal. We apologize for the delay. We had to weld the last engine strut in place while in transit. We are engaging the enemy. Clear the line of fire. I repeat, clear the line of fire. Anything in front of us is about to cease existing." "Cruiser," Vrox muttered. "That hull is a dreadnought class. They don't even know what they are flying." On the screen, the Hephaestus began to move. It did not glide. It lurched, propelled by engines that vomited pillars of fire and ionized gas miles long. The Void Hunters, sensing a new, massive source of biomass and energy, turned their attention from the broken 7th Fleet to this new challenger. A swarm of biofrigates detached from the main Leviathan and swarmed toward the human ship like wasps attacking a bear. "They have no shields," the sensor officer reported, panic rising in the digital tone. "I repeat, zero harmonic shielding detected. They are naked." "They will be slaughtered," Calith said, a strange pang of pity mixing with his guilt. "They brought a junk heap to a plasma fight." The swarm descended. Beams of concentrated acid and bioplasma struck the hull of the Hephaestus. Calith expected the ship to buckle, to explode, to vanish. Instead, the display showed something that defied all Concordat naval doctrine. The beams hit the patchwork armor and splashed. The outer layers of the human ship ablated, boiling away in clouds of sacrificial metal, revealing thicker, denser layers beneath. The ship shook, but it did not slow. It absorbed the punishment with a mechanical indifference. "Kinetic impact detected," the sensor officer said. "They are firing." The Concordat used lasers, particle beams, and elegant gravitational shears. The humans used rocks, or rather hyperaccelerated slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium, fired from magnetic rails running the entire length of the ship's spine. The Hephaestus shuddered as its main batteries fired. There was no flash of light, only the unseen ripple of projectiles moving at a fraction of the speed of light. The lead biofrigate of the Void Hunters simply vanished. One moment it was there, a terrifying organism of war. The next, it was a cloud of mist and shattered bone. The kinetica. Ounds didn't burn, they smashed. They transferred so much kinetic energy upon impact that the target liquefied. The Hephaestus fired again and again. Boom, 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 a rhythm of destruction. The ugly, scarred ship plowed through the enemy formation, smashing aside the wreckage of the ships it destroyed, physically ramming a corvette that got too close. "They are using the hull as a weapon," Vrox whispered, his mandibles clicking. They reinforce the prow with solid densium. They are ramming them. Inside the grand chamber, the atmosphere shifted from fear to a stunned, bewildered awe. They were watching a barroom brawler dismantle a team of fencers. It was brutal, inelegant, and messy, but it was effective. The Hephaestus was taking massive damage. Fires were visible on its decks, venting atmosphere and freezing instantly, but the ship fought on, a zombie of steel that refused to die. Then the Leviathan moved. The massive mothership of the Void Hunters, the size of a small moon, turned its primary weapon, a singularity bore toward the human pest. "They cannot survive that," Calith said quietly. "The bore tears matter apart at the atomic level. It requires perfect shields to deflect." "Terran vessel, take evasive action," the Concordat fleet commander screamed over the open channel. "Incoming singularity event." The voice from the Hephaestus returned, still calm, still sounding bored. "Copy that, command. We see it. We aren't moving. Hold on, this is going to get loud." "Not moving," Calith stared. The Hephaestus did something insane. As the Leviathan fired the black beam of destruction, the human ship didn't activate shields. It opened its prow. The massive, scar-covered front of the ship split open like a flower of jagged metal, revealing the dark, cavernous interior of the original ancient hull. But inside, where the ancient power core should have been, the humans had built something else. A spinning ring of containment magnets holding a swirling ball of pure, white energy. "Is that," Vrock stood up, knocking his chair over, "is that a star?" "It's a containment leak," the sensor officer corrected. "No, wait. They are channeling the output of the ship's reactor directly into a magnetic funnel. They aren't shielding against the beam. They are eating it." The black beam of the Leviathan struck the open maw of the Hephaestus. But instead of tearing the ship apart, the energy was sucked into the magnetic vortex, spiraling down into the human machine. The ship groaned, the audio sensors picking up the scream of metal stressed beyond its yield point. The hull glowed red, then white. The humans were capturing the enemy's energy weapon, condensing it, mixing it with their own dirty, volatile reactor output. "Return to sender," the human voice said. The Hephaestus fired. It wasn't a projectile. It was a lance of chaotic, unstable energy, a mixture of the Void Hunter's own singularity beam and the raw fury of a human fusion drive. It was a beam of pure rejection. It struck the Leviathan dead center. The biological moon shuddered. The beam didn't just burn, it infected the enemy ship with unstable physics. The Leviathan bloated, bubbled, and then ruptured. A chain reaction tore through the organic fleet. The feedback loop fried the neural link of the lesser ships. In seconds, the terrifying armada was reduced to drifting meat. The Hephaestus sat in the center of the carnage, glowing with heat. Parts of its hull melted into slag, leaking fluids and radiation, looking like a pile of burning garbage. And it was the most beautiful thing Calith had ever seen. "Threat neutralized," the human captain said. "We require a repair dock and coffee, preferably in that order. Hephaestus out." The link cut. The silence returned to the grand chamber, but it was different now. It was the silence of shame. They had given the humans a corpse, and the humans had turned it into a god of war. Calith looked at his hands, realizing that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted irrevocably. The primitives were not primitives. They were survivors, and they had just saved the masters who had mocked them. The diplomatic shuttle that carried Calith and Vrox to the Hephaestus was a masterpiece of Valdari engineering, sleek, silent, and smelling of lavender. It docked with the human ship with a shuddering clang that rattled Calith's teeth. The airlock cycle was loud, accompanied by the hiss of decontamination sprays that smelled of harsh chemicals. When the inner door opened, Calith expected a military honor guard. He expected uniforms, precision, perhaps a gloating display of strength. Instead, he stepped onto a deck plate that was scarred by welding burns. Cables hung from the ceiling like jungle vines, dripping hydraulic fluid into buckets. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, sweat, and something burning. Crew members in stained coveralls ran past, carrying tools that looked more like weapons. Houting orders in a chaotic dialect. It was an anthill of activity. There was no elegance here, only function. A human woman approached them. She was not tall, but she moved with a density of purpose that made her seem immovable. Her uniform was gray, unadorned save for a single bar on her collar, and her face was lined with exhaustion. She wiped grease from her hands onto a rag before offering one to Calith. "Hi, Exarch," she said, her voice raspy. "Welcome to the Hephaestus, or as you called it, the Valkyr Thad. I'm Admiral Sarah Vance. Watch your step. We're still venting plasma from the port nacelle." Admiral, Calith said, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of respect he had never offered a human before. Your vessel, it is remarkable and terrifying. It's a mess, Vance corrected, gesturing for them to follow. But it's our mess. Come, we should talk in the CIC. It's the only room with soundproofing. They walked through the corridors of the ship. Calith noticed that the walls were not uniform. Some sections were the original, smooth, ancient alloy of the gift ship. Others were riveted steel plates. Some were clearly parts cannibalized from other ships, Concordat, pirate, perhaps even enemy vessels. It was a chimera. I must ask, Vrox rumbled, stepping over a thick power cable snaking across the floor. How did you make this wreckage functional? The core was cracked. The logic crystals were shattered. It was impossible to repair. Vance stopped and looked at a section of the wall where a complex alien circuit board had been bypassed by a thick copper wire and a manual breaker switch. She smiled, a dry, humorless expression. You approached the problem like Valdari, she said. You saw broken technology and thought it needed to be restored to its original state. You saw a puzzle with missing pieces. Humans, we don't do puzzles, we do survival. When you gave us this hull, we didn't try to fix the ancient tech. We gutted it. We kept the frame, the armor, the bones, and then we stuffed it with everything we had. We didn't try to make it elegant. We tried to make it tough. But the physics, Calith pressed. The weapon you used, the energy absorption, that is not standard human science. No, Vance admitted, resuming her walk. That's what happens when you let human engineers play with ancient alien scraps. We found the singularity drive in the wreckage. It was broken, leaking. You would have sealed it in a stasis field. We poked it. We realized that if we fed it fusion plasma, it didn't stabilize, it got angry. We built the ship around that anger. We didn't master the technology, Exarch. We put a saddle on a hurricane and hoped we could steer. They reached the Combat Information Center. It was a dark room, illuminated by screens showing damage reports and sensor ghosts. In the center was a table, not of floating light, but of physical wood, a rare luxury, likely brought from Earth, covered in paper charts and tablets. Vance leaned against the table, crossing her arms. Let us be honest, Exarch, she said, her eyes hard. You gave us this ship as an insult. You thought we were scavengers. You were right. We are scavengers, but you forgot what scavengers do. We adapt. We take the broken things, the things you discard because they aren't perfect, and we find the use in them. You seek perfection. We seek survival. That's why you're losing this war. Calith felt the sting of truth. The Void Hunters, they are adapting to our frequencies. Our shields are useless. Because your shields are designed to be efficient, Vance said. They rely on specific harmonics. The Hunters learned the song and sang it back to destroy you. Our shields, they're just layers of dense matter and magnetic fields. There's no frequency to hack. It's just a wall. Sometimes you don't need a fencing foil. You need a brick. We need your help, Calith said, the words tasting like ash. The fleet is decimated. The Hunters are regrouping. They will target the core worlds next, if they reach the nurseries of Valdar. We know, Vance interrupted. That's why we're here, but we aren't doing it for you. We're doing it because if they eat you, they eat us next. And we have demands. Name them, Vrox said immediately. Resources, tech, planets. Scrap, Vance said. Calith blinked. Excuse me. We want the battlefields, Vance said, her eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. After the fights, you leave the wreckage, the broken ships, the shattered stations, the enemy corpses. You declare them sacred graves or hazardous zones. We want salvage rights to everything, every broken hull, every fried circuit. That is macabre, Calith whispered. Why? Because, Vance said, the Hephaestus is just the prototype. If you want us to win this war, we need a fleet, and since you won't give us ships, we'll build them out of the dead ones. The concept was horrifying to the Valdari sensibility, which viewed ships as living entities. Almost spiritual vessels. To stitch together the corpses of fallen comrades into new machines was necromancy. But Calith looked at the holographic map, at the red tide of the Void Hunters. He looked at Vance, this small, soft creature made of water and calcium, standing inside a metal beast that had just killed a god. Agreed, Calith said. You shall have your scrap. The months that followed were a blur of violence and industry. The war changed. It was no longer a series of elegant duels between fleets. It became a brawl. The humans led the charge, their fleet growing with every battle. The Hephaestus was joined by the Grendel, a destroyer built from the hollowed-out carcass of a Void Hunter bioship, fitted with human thrusters and bristling with stolen plasma cannons. Then came the Chimera, a carrier constructed from the fused wrecks of 3 different Concordat frigates. a lopsided, ugly platform that launched thousands of drone fighters. The Concordat fleets, once the pride of the galaxy, became support vessels for the human scavenger armada. The aliens provided the long-range sensor data, the logistical support, the medical bays. The humans provided the brutality. They fought in the mud, metaphorically. They laid minefields of nuclear debris. They used tractor beams to throw asteroids at enemy formations. They boarded enemy ships with shotguns and cutting torches, fighting hand-to-hand in the biosludge of the hunter vessels. Kalith spent much of his time on the Hephaestus, serving as the liaison. He watched the humans work. He saw how they argued, how they wept over their dead, how they celebrated survival with loud music and harsh alcohol. He began to understand the philosophy that Vance had spoken of. It wasn't just about technology. It was about resilience. The humans believed that nothing was truly broken, only waiting to be repurposed. It was a philosophy of hope disguised as pragmatism. But as the war pushed back toward the Void Hunter's origin point, a tier in space known as the Maw, the humans became quieter. Admiral Vance spent hours in the deep core of the Hephaestus, staring at the Singularity Drive, the original alien heart of the ship. "Something is wrong," Kalith said to her one evening, finding her in the engineering bay. The drive was pulsing with a rhythmic, hypnotic light. "We are winning. The Maw is surrounded. Why are you troubled?" Vance looked up, her face pale. "We found something, inside the drive's memory banks. When we bypassed the security protocols to make it work, we unlocked the logs, the original logs, from before this ship was the Valkyr-Thad." "It was an ancient warship," Kalith said, "from the precursor era." "No," Vance said softly. "It wasn't a warship, it was a key." She tapped a console and a projection sprang to life. It was a star map, but the constellations were unrecognizable, shifted by millions of years of drift. It showed the galaxy, but it was covered in red markers. "The Void Hunters," Vance explained. "They aren't an invasion, they are a cleanup crew." Kalith felt a chill run through his blood. "Explain." "The people who built this ship," Vance pointed to the hull around them. "The precursors, they created the Hunters. They made them to scrub the galaxy of dangerous civilizations. Civilizations that advanced too fast. Civilizations that were a threat to the stability of the universe." "The Great Filter," Kalith whispered. "A philosophical theory, but you are saying it is weaponized." "This ship," Vance continued, "was designed to control them. It's a shepherd ship. That's why the Leviathan hesitated before firing. It recognized the hull, that's why we could absorb the beam. We weren't fighting the enemy, we were holding the leash. But the leash is broken. The command codes are gone." "So we are fighting a programmed immune system," Kalith realized. "And we are the virus." "Exactly," Vance said. "And the Maw, it's not their home, it's the factory, and it's waking up. The sensors show activity. Something big is coming through, bigger than a Leviathan. If it crosses the threshold, the Hephaestus won't be enough. The whole damn scavenger fleet won't be enough." "Then what do we do?" Kalith asked. "We cannot close the tier." Vance looked at the drive, then at the patched walls, the welded scars, the human additions to the alien frame. "We do what we always do. We break it to fix it." "Admirals." "The drive," Vance said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a singularity, a miniature black hole held in check by magnetic fields. If we fly the Hephaestus into the Maw and drop the containment, the release of energy inside the tier wouldn't just close the door. It would collapse the tunnel. It would sever the connection to wherever they are coming from." "You would destroy the ship," Kalith gasped, "and the crew." "The crew evacuates," Vance said. "I stay. Someone has to manually override the safeties. The automation is twitchy. It needs a human touch." "Admiral, no," Kalith said, gripping her arm. "You cannot. You are the architect of our survival. We will find another way." "There is no other way, Exarch," Vance snapped, pulling away. "Look at the readings. The factory is pushing a Titan-class organism through. It's the size of a planetoid. If that thing enters real space, it will consume the stars. We have to use the scrap. We have to use the Hephaestus for what it was meant for. A sacrifice." The final briefing was somber. The plan was shared with the High Council and the scavenger captains. There was no debate. The logic was cold and undeniable. The humans accepted it with a grim nod. The aliens accepted it with bowed heads. The fleet would form a corridor, holding back the hunter swarms to clear a path for the Hephaestus. The battle for the Maw was the single greatest conflict in recorded history. The scavenger fleet, a swirling vortex of metal and defiance, clashed with the endless tide of biological horrors pouring from the red tier in space. Ships died by the hundreds. The Grendel was torn in half defending the flank. The Chimera rammed a swarm leader, detonating its magazines to buy time. On the bridge of the Hephaestus, Vance sat in the captain's chair. The bridge was empty save for her. Calith was on the comms from his shuttle, refusing to leave the immediate vicinity. "I am with you, Sarah," Calith's voice came over the speaker. "I will witness." "Get clear, Calith," Vance said, her hands flying over the controls. The ship was shaking violently. The hull groaned, the welds screaming as the gravity of the maw pulled at them. "I'm initiating the override sequence. Containment at 80%, 60%. Ahead, the maw loomed. It was a swirling vortex of red and black, a wound in the universe. Inside, Calith could see the massive shape of the Titan trying to push through, a mountain of eyes and teeth. "You gave us scrap," Vance whispered to herself, or perhaps to the universe, "and we made it matter." She pushed the throttle to maximum. The Hephaestus, the ugly, broken, beautiful ship, roared one last time. It didn't fire weapons. It became the weapon. It dove straight into the throat of the maw, past the grasping tendrils of the Titan. "Containment dropping to 0, Vance said. "It's been an honor, Hephaestus out." The transmission cut. Calith watched from the viewport of his shuttle. The Hephaestus vanished into the red darkness. For a second, nothing happened. Then the center of the maw turned a blinding, impossible white. The singularity was unleashed. The laws of physics in that localized area were suspended. Space collapsed in on itself. The Titan, halfway through the portal, shrieked, a psychic sound that every being in the system felt in their bones as it was crushed into a single point of infinite density. The maw imploded. The red tear snapped shut, leaving only the dark, cold vacuum of space. The shockwave tossed the fleets like toys, but when the sensors cleared, the sky was empty of enemies. The hunters that remained, cut off from the hive mind of the factory, went dormant, drifting aimlessly. Silence returned to the system, but this time it was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of grief. 10 cycles later, the grand chamber of the High Synod was full again, but the seating arrangement had changed. The humans were no longer petitioners. They sat at the right hand of the Exarch. The table was not made of light, but of wood, reclaimed timber from earth, a gift to the council. Calith, now High Chancellor, stood before the assembly. He looked older. His chiton was graying. He looked at the human representative, a young man who had served as Vance's XO. "Today we unveil the memorial," Calith said. The holographic display activated. It showed the new flagship of the Joint Fleet. It was not a sleek Valdari cruiser. It was not a blocky human dreadnought. It was a synthesis. Beautiful yet rugged, elegant yet armored. And floating next to it, preserved in a stasis field, was a piece of twisted, blackened metal, a fragment of the Hephaestus's hull, recovered from the edge of the collapse. "They gave us scrap," Calith said, repeating the words that had become a mantra for the new era. "And they showed us that there is no such thing as trash, only potential." But the story did not end there. The young human representative stood up. He looked nervous but determined. "Chancellor," he said, we found something else in the fragment." The chamber went quiet. "The sensor logs from the Hephaestus survived on this piece of plating," the human said. "From the nanosecond before the collapse, Admiral Vance." She didn't just destroy the maw. The display shifted. It showed the final data burst. It wasn't just energy readings, it was a scan. A scan of what was on the other side of the maw before it closed. It showed a vast artificial structure, a Dyson sphere encompassing a dying star, and from Hat sphere a signal was broadcasting, a signal that matched the ancient codes of the Valkyrthad. "The precursors aren't dead," the human said, his voice ringing in the hall. "The factory wasn't automated. Someone was driving it, and before the gate closed, the Admiral sent a message through." "What did she say?" Calith asked, dread and hope warring in his hearts. "She sent the schematics," the human smiled. "The schematics of the Hephaestus and a text file." "Read it." The human read from the datapad. "To the makers of the hunters, we fixed your ship, we fixed your test, we are coming to fix you next. Expect us." Calith looked at the stars displayed on the ceiling of the chamber. The war was over, but the crusade was just beginning. The universe was vast, terrifying, and full of ancient threats. But as he looked at the humans, at their grim smiles and their eyes full of stubborn fire, he felt a wave of pity for the precursors. They had underestimated the scavengers. They had treated the galaxy as a trash heap. And now the garbage was coming to take out the trash. "Prepare the fleet," Calith said, his voice strong. "We have work to do." The galaxy was no longer a place of fear. It was a workshop, and the humans had the hammer.